So the question becomes, okay, well, how do you differentiate yourself? If you're simply focused on those demand driving levers alone, which we still need to do, that's going to start to get drowned out in the background. And therefore, you must combine those demand driving levers with a really strong purpose and positioning.
Welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast, hosted by Bernie Borges. This is the podcast for the modern marketer who wants to hear from their peers in the trenches and the occasional analyst or rockstar influencer sharing strategies and tactics about what's working in modern marketing. Be sure to listen to the end of each episode for Bernie's summary and takeaways so you can plan your next move in your own modern marketing journey.
Hey there, welcome to episode 243 of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. I'm Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, and your host. Hey, thanks for listening. Hey, this episode is brought to you by Subtitle, a new online tool that makes it easy to automatically add captions to any video in minutes. Don't let your videos get passed over on social media because people can't follow along on mute. Head to subtitle.com/Vengreso to get started. And my guest on this episode is Armen Najarian, Chief Marketing Officer at Agari. Armen, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thank you so much, Bernie. Really appreciate you hosting me on today's episode.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about actually one of my favorite topics. I don't think I told you that before I pressed record. We're here to talk about brand marketing and B2B and how brand marketing is the new demand generation. But before we do that, let's give my listener a little context. You are CMO at Agari. Who is Agari?
So we're the guys that stop all the bad things from reaching your inbox, specifically the advanced email attacks, the phishing attacks, the business email compromise attacks, the account takeovers, all the stuff that can put your company on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for the wrong reasons. We stop that from happening.
Fantastic. That's a great cause. All right. Well, I'm going to pull something that you wrote in a terrific LinkedIn article that we will link up in the show notes. And you say here that delivering quarterly pipeline goals is just table stakes, not at the expense, though, of investing in the brand. It shouldn't be an either or decision. And it can't be a we'll invest in the brand once we get the demand engine in shape. So why don't you speak to that? What is it about brand marketing that is the new demand gen?
Let's back up a moment. And the backing up basically says, why are we in this situation? Where just my observation is that, a lot of companies do forego this investment in the brand. And I think the reason why is many kind of earlier stage Silicon Valley startups are hyper-focused, as they should be, on growth and revenue. And, you can most tangibly kind of measure progress toward that growth and revenue by looking at pipeline. And you can most tangibly measure progress in pipeline by looking at kind of traditional demand gen levers, right? The programs that you run, the events that you show up at, what your SDRs are doing. And so that's kind of the backdrop for why I believe we're in the situation that we're in as an industry. However, my thesis, really my argument in this point of view, is that that's great. You've got to continue doing that. And you must also start to immediately invest in your brand. So, so the first question is kind of, well, what does that mean, right? What is the brand, right? That's such a fairly broad term. My definition, Bernie, is the most tangible outcome that I've seen before is when my head of sales says, hey, when we show up at new accounts that we've never been at before, people know who Agari is, right? That's probably the most tangible way to tell me that this investment in the quote unquote brand is actually paying off.
Okay. You talked about really defining the why behind it's important to invest in the brand out of the gate. So what are some of the elements that go into that? I mean, design, for example, is a critical element of your brand expression. You want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, let's talk about the why first. I believe this is the single most important feature or attribute of a brand hierarchy that is often overlooked. And as a marketer who loves my product, I want to talk about how great that product is and what it does, and I can tell you about all the great capabilities and the competitive differentiation, and that's all fine. But there's something above and beyond that, right? The halo above that is really not about the product. It's about the business. Why does this business exist? What mission is this business on? How is this business making the world a better place, right? It might sound a little cheesy to say that, but ultimately people want to buy from people they believe in and companies they believe in. So, the long story short on the mission, kind of the why, as I call it, is to give you an example. At Agari, we have a very straightforward mission that resonates with a lot of people. And that says Agari protects digital communications to ensure humanity prevails over evil. So in that, what I consider to be a bold statement, there's nothing about the product. There's nothing around capabilities, right? There's nothing around features. It's all around kind of what mission are we on to make the world a better place. And this often gets overlooked, right? Because it's so much easier to talk about kind of how you do it and what you do. And so I would say, I would encourage everyone to start there and really step back and say, okay, in this mission, as you're starting to construct your brand narrative, start with why, really understand what that means.
Love that. So the real focus there is, why does the business exist? First, define that, make sure that everybody's on the same page with that why and can communicate that right down to any person in the company.
So that your grandmother gets it. Mine literally does. Yeah.
Okay, great. So do you want to talk about then how you begin to communicate that? In your case, the mission statement and the why?
Yes. How you bring that to life. So generally, mission statements, I think traditionally are designed to be a little bit more internally focused. I think in recent years, you've started to see those messages extend externally. And we do that, right? So we don't necessarily lead with the mission statement in all cases. But for example, the very last slide in our exec overview deck is that mission that I described earlier. So it shows up there. It shows up on our website, not homepage top of the fold, but it shows up on the website, kind of on our About Agari page. Every employee commits it to memory. So the point here is, this is not words that marketing puts on paper. This is a mission that the entire exec team and really the entire company needs to believe in and buy into and integrate into their own stories as they tell their stories across vehicles. Other ways to bring it to life that you brought up, Bernie, certainly, the visual expression of the brand, very, very important. So as you're constructing your brand narrative, and then, your brand expression, having some really solid design principles. We took a step back at Agari and did that about 9 months ago. As we were rethinking the brand narrative, we said, okay, there's probably a better way to visually express that. Let's take a fresh look, clean sheet of paper. We adopted some more modern design styles. We expanded the color palette. We brought in many, many new visual metaphors, new patterns, new shadings, just kind of a top to bottom review of how this brand gets expressed.
Okay. I know you also talk about the importance of promoting the brand internally so that you can really generate a lot of energy and buzz among the workforce so that it's really a cultural driver for them.
So true. One of the really interesting outputs of this project, for lack of a better word, is the company, Agari, has really latched on to this. The employees, the executive team, the board of directors have really, there's something emotional, something visceral around this mission statement that I described and kind of the brand that wraps around that. And it's been very powerful. We've embraced catchphrases, like when we're introducing Agari to new employees, that we are a mission-driven business. I mean, that's literally how we now describe what we've set up here at Agari. And so that really is the launching off point for telling the Agari story internally. And people believe this. And then important things, right? Reminding yourselves, memorializing the mission and elements of the brand kind of in the office environment as you exit the elevators on the 20th floor for our building in Foster City. And you turn to your right, and big letters stenciled to the wall is the mission statement that I described earlier. So it's front and center every day as every employee at headquarters walks to their respective meetings. It's become part of the fabric for how we live our lives every day at Agari.
I lifted this from, I don't remember if I lifted it from your website or from your article or maybe both. I just want to share it with my listener and then ask you to comment on it in the context of this conversation, Armen. And that is, Agari gives you the confidence to open, click, and trust everything in your inbox.
Yeah. Yep. So that is part of what's called the brand platform. And, just again, not to get into technical of terms, the mission statement is kind of the top level view. And below that is something called a promise statement, a brand promise statement. And what you just described is that. And again, very relatable terms that virtually, every enterprise on the planet an employee within those enterprises can identify with. And so, that starts to get into a little bit more of the specifics of what we do, what we deliver, right? What's that promise that we are making, with this brand hierarchy that we've established? What promise are we making to the businesses that we sell to and engage with? Is yes, you can trust everything in your inbox. We've even taken it a step further, Bernie, and said, okay, that being the promise statement, we've developed an entire campaign. Our 2019 campaign at Agari is Trust Your Inbox. And so that's the Uber campaign theme, and we've built a number of campaign flows around that. We've adopted, the hashtag Trust Your Inbox as kind of the default way to tag all of our content across social media. So as you could probably start to piece together here, this is a highly integrated set of attributes that starts with the mission and ladders down to the brand promise. And now we're talking about campaigns and even social media.
I'll be back in a moment with the rest of my conversation with Armen Najarian. If you're creating video for social media, you know how important it is to have captions on all of your videos. Really, think of how many times you've passed over a video on social because your phone was muted or you were in a public place or even at work. Unfortunately, adding a caption to videos has been a pain or an expensive task to outsource. That's exactly why we use Subtitle, a new online tool that automatically adds captions to any video in minutes. Subtitle auto-detects the spoken word in your videos and burns in open captions that are timed perfectly. Their easy editing interface even helps you clean up the text and customize the captions so that they fit your branding. Visit subtitle.com/Vengreso today to get started. You started with the internal communication of the mission statement and being a mission-driven business and really getting everybody on board. And now you started to really talk about how the public unveiling of that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that public unveiling and how you communicate that brand promise to the marketplace?
It's integrated. And so if you look across, how we go to market at Agari, it all starts with, educating our own workforce so that when they're out there doing their jobs, they can articulate these components of the Agari story, right? And so the exec deck has many of these elements, including the mission statement, as I mentioned, the last slide in the deck. The brand promise becomes something that is committed to memory and everyone's able to recite. And then just in visual written forms, right? This campaign that I described, this Trust Your Inbox campaign, many of the nurture streams, right? Highlight examples, right? Success stories of companies that have stopped, incoming business email compromise attacks, and profiles an individual user who was able to, thwart, a very potentially costly attack from ruining their enterprise or really causing major disruption with their enterprise. And Trust Your Inbox becomes really the kind of the lasting impression that we leave there. We literally end with that and we restate, many parts of that brand promise that you had recited a few minutes ago, Bernie, that backdrop.
One of the things that you mentioned in that article that you published on LinkedIn, and of course, we're going to link it up in our show notes, is you have this visual in this article. I'm going to go look at it here while we're talking. I guess the image is an image of Cyberscape, and it's, a few billion companies on one visual image. And then you have this little dot that shows where you are, but everybody's a little dot practically on this landscape, this Cyberscape. So I mentioned that, Armen, because in the context of this discussion that we're having around your brand strategy, you're focused on breaking out as a category leader, right? And so you've got to have a strong brand in order for you to break out as a category leader. So you want to kind of remark on kind of where you are in that journey and what your plans are, what your vision is over the next, 1, 2, 3 years.
Yeah. The visual you mentioned is published by a company called Momentum Cyber, and it's effectively a market map. Imagine all the categories within the world of cybersecurity and every logo that fits into each of those categories. So it's a very much an eye chart. And, there's probably 20 different categories. And then there's one called messaging security, which is where Agari lives. And the point here is it's a very noisy landscape. So imagine, every CMO at each one of these companies that each logo represents, having the same, well-intentioned strategy that I have, right, to allow their company to be successful and achieve the revenue objectives. And there's a lot of noise. So the question becomes, okay, well, how do you differentiate yourself If you're simply focused on those demand driving levers alone, which we still need to do, that's going to start to get drowned out in the background. And therefore, you must combine those demand driving levers, right? The go to market, the sales development channels, the campaigns and the nurture streams with a really strong purpose and positioning, which is the brand. Mm-hmm. And that's really kind of the premise for why I included that chart in this blog entry.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Armen, let me do this. Let me jump over to our summary here. I want to recap the key points that we discussed, and then I'm going to ask you to remark, comment, or fill in any holes on anything that maybe I left out in the summary. Then we'll bring our podcast conversation to a wrap. We began our conversation with a brief introduction to your company, Agari. I love how you frame it up. You stop all bad things from reaching your inbox, things like phishing attacks, and really prevent evil from happening. I love the brand promise. Agari gives you the confidence to open, click, and trust everything in your inbox. And so we started the conversation with the why. Why is branding so important in B2B, especially a crowded space like yours? And you mentioned that it's really not about the product. There's lots of products out there like that eye chart that you referenced in that diagram. You've really got to start with why does the business exist and really communicate that. And so in the case of Agari, your mission statement is to protect digital communication to ensure humanity prevails over evil. Love it. I mean, everybody rallies around that, internal, board, everybody within the company. So it's really focused on that mission statement. And then how do you communicate that? The brand expression. And that's, really a visual representation. You did some updates to the design style that really reflect that. And then, of course, you're promoting and socializing that, starting internally with executives, employees, et cetera, the board, but also really making sure that everyone is focused on using the mission-driven business sort of mindset around your strategy around the brand. And so again, the brand promise, as I said earlier, Agari gives you the confidence to open, click, and trust everything in your inbox. I think it's worth repeating. And then from a public communication standpoint, everything's integrated. You educate the workforce on the Agari story, make sure that they can articulate the brand promise. And then you've got a whole 2019 campaign. It's very visual. It's got success stories in it. And you're really focused on breaking out as a category leader by messaging around your brand promise within the messaging security category, which I believe is where you guys live, and really differentiating your brand promise from any potential competitors. So, Armen, is there anything that you'd like to add to that summary that perhaps I left out, or maybe I'll jog your memory on a point?
It was a great summary. I will add to that two things. One is while I happen to be the CMO and I, instigated this process at Agari shortly after I joined 10 months ago, this is something that is never to be done in a vacuum by a marketing organization. As you could probably tell, Bernie, this is effectively, corporate in nature and must involve a cross-section, if not the entire executive team. And you certainly want to get the voice of the customer, the voice of the partners, to the extent you can get analysts kind of weighing in as you're going through this journey. Really, really important, right? Never do it in a vacuum. This is not a marketing exercise. This is a corporate exercise where, marketing is a huge stakeholder in this. That's number one. And then number two, I'll just say kind of a little bit more humorously, the title I chose for this, this blog that you referenced, which is the premise for the discussion, brand marketing is the new demand generation. This article has gotten, about 100 likes. It's gotten about 34 comments. One of the comments that someone lobbed over the weekend was, "Hey, I love the point of view, but I don't necessarily believe that brand marketing really is the new demand generation." And so I thought about that, and I actually replied, and my reply was, "You're right. I was being a little bit dramatic in my statement, purposely so. And really, the point here is symbolically that these two must coexist. These two big investments in the marketing wheelhouse must coexist in order for you to hit your objectives, company objectives, revenue objectives, without a strong brand platform, with all the goodness that we talked about on this episode, Bernie. Your demand engine, especially in a crowded space, is only going to take you so far." And so, yes, this is a symbolic statement that I'm making. I do 100% believe you must have all those demand generation vehicles still in place using the modern frameworks and the modern analytics. But you must, of course, invest in your brand, using a lot of the principles that we described earlier on in this episode.
And if I may add one point to that, Armen, and that is that, the sales organization always wants leads. They want demand, right? But if you don't have a brand that is A, recognizable, and B, stands for something that is meaningful to the prospective client, then leads have limited value. So while I understand your point that what you were saying is a little bit on the dramatic side, just to, get some attention and I think, highly warranted, the two go hand in hand, right? You've got to have a strong brand identity and promise in order for leads to be valuable.
It's a really important point. And not ironically, but interestingly enough, the people that get that first and the most is the sales organization. Yep. And as I started off this episode stating, when my CRO or regional VP say, hey, I'm walking into this new account, this big new account in the Midwest, and they've known of Agari and we've never talked to them before, that is all the proof you need that building this brand halo with clarity of purpose is making a difference. It's cutting through the clutter and it's connecting with someone emotionally. And it's helping the seller. So when they show up, there's a little bit of air cover there.
The irony is that what you just shared, that story, doesn't show up on a dashboard. It's not a quantifiable metric that's on a dashboard. However, it's very real and very valuable.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, let's wrap it here. Armen, where can my listener connect with you online to just connect with you, learn more about what you've got going on at Agari?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, at Armen Nigerian, name spelled as it sounds. And then on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out and connect with me. Always happy to make new connections. And I try to stay active there and share a lot of content.
Fantastic. Well, my listener knows that we will link that up in our show notes page at Vengreso.com. And on that note, Armen, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Really appreciate it, Bernie. Thanks so much.
If you've ever wondered how we at Vengreso get those cool captions to any video on social media, well, wonder no more. Use Subtitle so your videos stand out by visiting subtitle.com/Vengreso.
This wraps up another inspiring episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you want to share this podcast with a friend, let them know that we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. And we love 5-star reviews. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. You can read the show notes for each episode at Vengreso.com. While you're there, sign up to receive the show notes delivered to your inbox through our weekly alerts. And be sure to also check out our Selling with Social podcast hosted by Vengreso CEO, Mario Martinez Jr. Again, you'll find our show notes at Vengreso.com. And that's one S in Vengreso. Tune in again next week when Bernie Borges brings you another inspiring interview to help you thrive on your modern marketing journey.